Welcome to the Austin Biz Buzz, the podcast that builds the buzz about Austin business. So kick up your feet and turn your brain on. It's time to talk Austin business right now. Here's Herdy.
Hey everybody, we want to welcome you to the Austin Biz Buzz, where we do build the buzz about Austin business. And tonight we're going to talk to Joshua Massingill. He's an attorney, business attorney, located here in Austin, but helps clients throughout the Texas area. And we're going to get to him in just 1 minute. So Joshua, welcome to the podcast. Listen, I want to thank my sponsor. Mike O'Neill is a money coach here in Austin, Texas, part of the Dave Ramsey program, but works with people to help them understand how to take care of their money when they're younger so that they have something at the end of the days when they retire. But he also works with people to help them with debt. But I encourage you to go look at mkoneal.com, mkoneal.com. Mike Neal was kind enough, a friend of mine, and was kind enough when I relaunched the Austin Biz Buzz to jump on and kind of help me with it so I could get all the editing taken care of. So Mike, thank you very much, mkoneal.com. Joshua, welcome.
Thank you. What is it they say in Radio Land? First time, long time?
Yeah. Now, how many podcasts have you been on? Because I know that you've done quite a bit of work for a lot of clients. Have you been on many podcasts yourself?
You know, we've done some of that. I'm doing more of it, obviously, now that coronavirus has us all living as mole people. It's one of the things that you can do from your house as a podcast. So, yeah, we've done quite a few.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've got some questions, and to kind of help you keep focused. Now, to let the listening audience know, we're on video, but this always comes out to be an audio podcast. But I put the questions up in front of us, so I give you some, I know you know them better than I do, but this helps me with going through the questions because there's a lot of detail here. We'll probably be on, guys, about 30 minutes tonight with Joshua. So let's jump into this if you don't mind.
Let's do it.
All right. So, hey, this is kind of an interesting first question that you put up here. When I looked at this, I went, really? Because is this a good time to start a business? And what do you mean by that?
Well, that's one of the questions that my clients, and potential clients have been posing is I've got this idea, I'm ready to go, but, the world is kind of crazy right now. Is now a good time to start a business? Do I really want to be doing this right now? And yeah, I understand sort of where that question comes from, but my philosophy about it is it's a little like buying a house. I mean, people say now is a great time to buy a home. Well, the best time to buy a home is when you need the home. In other words, when it's right for you. So for some people, now is an excellent time to start a new business. For other people, maybe not so much, but it really is going to have more to do with your individual circumstances than anything going on in the world with coronavirus or whatever.
And so before we get to the next question, I always like to do this at the beginning, Joshua. If people want to contact you, to talk to you, what is the best means for them to reach you? Where do you like them to go look for you?
Sure. Yeah. You can just go to our website. It's jm.legal. So no .com, no .net, just jm.legal. And everything you need would be right there.
Super. Hey, so why would I need, or why do we need a legal entity? What is the benefit?
Well, there's several reasons that as a business owner or a budding entrepreneur, you might want to start a business entity. The short answer really is that you form an entity to protect your personal assets from your business liabilities. So you want to go out into the world and conduct business and take risks, and you want to be able to do that while protecting, your personal assets. And so that's the liability veil that you hear people talk about, the corporate veil. That's a big draw, obviously, to starting an entity. There are other reasons, some having to do with convenience. You give yourself sort of a separate legal person. Corporations are legal people that can enter into contracts and take on liabilities. It makes it easier for you to take investment because you've got sort of this independent thing, and you can give 20% of it or 30% of it to somebody else to go into business together. And then of course, it makes it easier for you to exit your business when you get ready to retire or move on to the next thing, because it's, it's separate from you and you can sell it off or whatever. So there's a lot of reasons why people might want to form an entity, but primarily we're concerned as attorneys with protecting, your personal assets.
And I would say personally, Joshua, from owning a business since 2008, that one of the things folks need to do is really sit down with an attorney, right? And make sure they're on the same page, make sure they understand what's necessary in the beginning stages of that business. So I agree with you. It's real important to have that legal entity.
Yeah, I think so. There are times where I've sat down with a client and we've spent an hour just diagramming kind of their business plans and looking at legal structures. And then kind of at the end of our meeting, they say, well, why would I use you instead of like LegalZoom or whatever? and I tell them, well, part of the reason is the conversation we just had, the hour of planning that we just did that you're not going to get from a robo-lawyer.
Yeah, and you just made me think of something. You when you said that I go through the same struggle when people tell me there's people running ads on Facebook that can rank you on Google first page in 5 minutes. You don't need consulting, buddy. Okay, so I get it.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, well, exactly. Hey, so we hear people just generally in business talk about this corporate veil, and those are kind of legal terms, right? They're terms for how business is set up. Can you what does that mean? I bet you people can't identify that until you explain it.
Yeah, well, it's one of those terms probably that people have heard, the corporate veil, piercing the corporate veil. We use business entities to limit liability. And so, sometimes you might have an entity that has lots of liability, big liability, and it may dwarf even the assets that are inside that company. So let's say somebody wants to sue you, but there's not much money in the company. Well, what they're going to try to do, if they're a good lawyer, is to find a way to get to you personally, because that's where the money is. And so if you have that liability veil, and if that's intact, they're not going to be able to, sue you personally. And the ways that you sort of preserve that liability protection is by having an entity, following some corporate formalities, treating your company as its own legal person, and then just being really careful when you sign contracts. It's funny, people spend a lot of money sometimes with a lawyer or whoever getting their entity put together. And then when it comes time to sign a contract, they just sign it in their personal name, Hurdy Burke. Well, if you do that, then you've just bound yourself in contract. So you've set up this giant liability veil with your company, and then you've just done an in run around it by signing a contract in your personal name. And so that's one of the things that we always try to educate clients about, is just ways to preserve that liability protection and getting them to understand that it's not something that you get once, it's bestowed once and enjoyed forever, but it's something you sort of have to carefully maintain and cultivate.
Hey, so once I start this business entity and I'm fully protected, what are some other components we need to think about?
Well, insurance is the big one, right? So, one of the ways we limit our liability is through creating a business entity, but that's sort of half the equation. The other half is insurance. So you want to make sure that, well, let's say you're a restaurant, you'd want general liability coverage for slips and falls. You might want dram shop coverage, for people that, drink too much and have an accident in the parking lot or whatever. So depending on your type of business, there's going to be insurance that you can purchase that will protect you from the types of liabilities that you're most likely to encounter. And so that's, it's sort of, I look at it as two sides of the same coin. You've got your corporate veil on one side, and then on the other side, we've got insurance, which is something you always want to consider.
Yeah. So, and then now I thought this was interesting. The type of entity should I choose? I imagine this is where it gets a little bit, when you're meeting with clients, and you're trying to figure out the best route to go, right? To protect your business or set it up correctly. Can you go through a couple of those with us?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's lots of different types of legal entities you can choose from. So you could, set up an LLC, a limited liability company. You could set up a for-profit corporation, or, maybe a professional association or a limited partnership, or, there's all different types of entities, and which one is right for you is going to sort of be determined by your particular circumstances, the vast majority of entities that are created in Texas, and I would assume basically every other state, are limited liability companies because they give you all of the liability protection you'd get from a corporation, but they're easier to operate. They're flexible like a partnership would be, and they have tax flexibility. So the short sort of answer is, probably you want to start a limited liability company if you're just, kind of the average bear. But for other types of, circumstances, you might want to look at a different type of business entities. And this is an area where I see people go horribly wrong, because what a lot of people don't realize is that many professions are restricted to a specific type of entity. So let's take like medicine, for example. You can't practice medicine out of an LLC. You have to practice out of a professional entity. So a professional limited liability company or a professional association, and actually the Secretary of State publishes this huge chart that you can look at to determine who can form what. But even, it's down to like, equine dentistry. So dentistry for horses, they have special rules that apply to them. So, and if you don't know that, you might perfectly form an entity, but it may be illegal for the profession that
totally
that you
wrong.
happen to be.
Yeah, totally wrong. Totally set up incorrectly. So that's another. And now I would think that another thing is that a lot of people I know, and I'm throwing this out, maybe it's in here and I'm beating it to it, but a lot of people try to set these up through their CPAs as opposed to an attorney, right? And I'm telling folks, you need to set this up through an attorney.
Well,
is that true? I guess what I'm saying is, if I had my druthers how I was going to set this up, I'd want to work through the legal side.
Yeah, here's what I tell clients. You don't want me doing your taxes.
Okay, that makes that simple. I get that.
In the same way you don't want me doing your taxes, you probably don't want your accountant handling your legal issues.
Okay.
But what I will say is that almost every legal decision you make will have a tax consequence. And so in the ideal world, you've got an attorney and a CPA, and they're communicating and working together. So, obviously for questions of liability, I think an attorney is going to be your best choice.
So both.
But you need both. You need somebody, because, I'm very reluctant to give clients in-depth tax advice. I took federal tax. I think I got a B. All the rules have changed since I learned it anyway. So right. I try to stay in my lane.
Yeah, so that makes sense. You'd work with both, and you would hire both to put them together so y'all could communicate and help that business throughout the journey. So many businesses start out as they go and they get their DBA in their county, right? They set up, they go and do their search, they look for see if that's out there, if anybody's using it. So let's talk about DBAs. And I thought the funny thing is that I've never heard this. A DBA is a type of entity, and you've got it's a nickname, huh? What?
Yeah. Well, you'll hear people sort of say, in common parlance, they'll say, well, I'm a DBA, or, we're a DBA. And, a DBA, the sort of formal name of that would be assumed business name. And it's not a type of entity. It's not a thing. It's just a nickname. So it doesn't bestow on you any liability protection. It's not an entity like a limited liability company or a corporation. It's just you basically telling the state, we're here and we're doing business under this other name so that you can know where to find us. And, for some businesses, that's fine. I tell people, if you're selling doilies on Etsy and, you have a very small business and very limited liability and you don't ever plan on taking on a partner, that's probably fine for you. But if you're kind of graduating into conducting real business, you're going to want to be inside a business entity.
Yeah. And so you see a lot of solopreneurs, maybe small business entrepreneurs that just start off with a DBA, right, Joshua? And
right.
They're just independent contractors, consulting, they work with business, but they're not employees of that business, whatever those 11 rules are, right? So
right.
Yeah.
And I'm not knocking it. That's what's right for a lot of people. but it may not be right for you forever.
Well, especially if you need protection from something, right? I mean,
right,
yeah, right. Yeah. But that's where you start. You got to get a DBA, right?
Right. Yeah.
You have to name your business
point.
and decide where you go from there. All right. Got it.
Right.
All right. So what is the difference between, we're going to get into a little deeper dive here, the difference between the LLC and the S Corp? And I imagine some of that has to do with taxes, but I'll let you kind of tell us the difference from the legal side.
Yeah, well, it's actually sort of a trick question. So this is one that gets posed to us quite often, should I be an LLC or should we set up an S Corp? And the truth is, S Corp is not a type of entity. It's just a tax designation. So if you're a corporation, you can either be taxed as a C Corp or an S Corp. You can be a limited liability company taxed as an S Corp or maybe taxed as a partnership. So they're not mutually exclusive, but S Corp, it sort of sounds like the name of an entity, but it's actually not. It's just a tax designation. And so for many people, especially if, like a single member LLC service business, at some point, electing to be taxed as an S Corp probably makes the most sense for you for tax reasons. But you can be both. And so that's just some terminology I've found that kind of trips people up sometimes.
Now, Texas has I guess they have a franchise tax, correct? It's filed if they're a certain type of entity. Is that correct?
Yeah. Entities pay franchise tax, and I forget what the exact number is, but you're exempt from it until you hit a certain amount of revenue. And it is a tax on revenue, not income, because income taxes are constitutionally prohibited in Texas. But once you hit as a business a pretty high level of revenue, then you have to pay the franchise tax. And so that's not something that affects, many of my clients, especially the smaller businesses, but it is something to be aware of. Really, where a lot of people get tripped up is if they know they don't have to pay the franchise tax, they think that means they don't have to file the annual franchise tax report.
Oh, yeah, right.
which is wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
And if you have a good CPA, they're going to make sure you're filing that report. But if you're trying to do your taxes yourself, that might be something that you neglect and forget to file. And if you do that, they'll revoke your right to transact business in Texas. So that's something you definitely want to stay on top of.
Okay, good. Okay, guys, we're kind of getting down to our final two questions with Joshua. Joshua, it's another great time to kind of let you jump in and tell us the best way you like to be contacted if people want to reach out to you. Can you give us a website and some other information how we can find you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you can go to our website. It's jm.legal, www.jm.legal. All our contact information's on there, or you can shoot me an email even. I'm josh@jm.legal.
And so getting back to our final two questions, and oh, by the way, something I didn't see on here, I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, before I ask these last two, do you also work with nonprofits? Can you work with nonprofits through the legal minefields?
Absolutely. We do a lot of nonprofit work. The setups for a nonprofit corporation are pretty straightforward. Where it gets a little tricky is in getting tax exempt status from the IRS.
Yeah.
So, the main reason that a lot of people want to be a nonprofit is so that they can get that tax exempt status. And then that way donations that, you get are tax deductible. That's the way you attract donations, is by being able to give people tax deductibility. And that process, it can be a little cumbersome. It takes a little while to get that through the IRS. Especially right now with coronavirus and everything, they're pretty backed up. But we do a lot of that work. We've done a lot of work for charities here, kind of in the North Austin area, and that's definitely something we love to help people with.
Yeah, and I was going to say, depending on what you're trying to do with the 501, there's that 3 designation, 4 designation, 5, and depending on how you want to give people a write-off for a 3, or if you just want to represent something politically, you can be a 4. I mean, you've got to know these rules. So that's why I asked you, because this is a great place for people to decide if they ever want to use you to think about doing a nonprofit. They need to get into the different ways that can be set up with bylaws and everything.
Right. And when we are going to work with somebody to set up a nonprofit, we have sort of an unwritten rule that we really don't want to work with you if you don't have a CPA.
Because it's just, no kidding. No
there's
kidding.
so many ways that you could get tripped up, and I think that that's the only responsible way to do it, really. So ideally, when we're doing nonprofit work, we've got a team sort of assembled with a good accountant and then a good legal team.
And I think that kind of just segments right into our next question, which is some people use CPAs to establish their entity, which we just talked about a little bit ago. And is that a great idea? And I think we decided, you want to handle the legal side, CPA needs to handle the finance side, but y'all can work together. Is there anything else we missed in that you want to dive into?
Well, yeah, just say, like, for example, we do a lot of healthcare work. Just for example, and there are legal setups that would be perfect for, let's say, a landscaping company that would get a dentist sent to jail. I mean, there are serious regulations in the world of healthcare that are just completely different from what you'd see in another industry. And so that's the sort of thing that a lawyer with some specialized sort of knowledge would know about, that you're not going to get from maybe a CPA or a robo lawyer like LegalZoom or whatever. And so
Sure.
Yeah, I think especially if you're in a kind of a specialty profession, you really are probably going to want to use an attorney.
Yeah, so we're going to do the last question, and I'm going to throw another one at you after this one, and that is this virus and how it's affected contracts. You want to make sure that when you have contracts signed and they're legal. So how are writing contracts different than they were before we got all cooped up in our homes?
Right. Yeah. Well, as an attorney, one of the moments I dread sometimes is when you turn the contract over to the client and their first question is, why is it so long? I wanted it to be short. Why is it so long?
Yeah.
And one of the reasons it's so long is because we put, sometimes a lot of boilerplate in there. And one of those boilerplate provisions is something called force majeure, which is a term that basically nobody knew until, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, when they started to realize that it was a legal issue. That's a provision that would excuse non-performance of a contract when performance would be impossible because of, I don't know, a hurricane or maybe a pandemic. So, we're making sure that contracts include force majeure provisions. That's obviously something that's hot right now. I think just in general, among my clients, what I'm seeing is people are a little bit more aware of the risks with, when we're getting ready to sign a contract or a commercial lease or something. They're a little more cautious than they might normally be, and which is a good thing, So we're, we've had to adapt a little bit, but mostly we're just doing what we've always done.
Yeah. So Joshua, on another note, some things I've noticed, and I try to alert my clients to find an attorney, is I see a lot of websites, even still today in business, that don't have a privacy statement, don't have a terms of service. And I tell my clients when I'm with them, you need to get this taken care of. If you're collecting any kind of personal information or have a client, you need to have some sort of agreement letting people know what you do with their information.
Absolutely. And what, a lot of people, and this is of course a developing area of law, and it's only going to get more prevalent, I think, but California
yeah.
has its own set of rules about data privacy and, information gathering. And of course, Europe, they have some very strict laws in Europe. So if you've got something up that you think, people would be accessing from the European Union, then there's a whole nother set of laws you have to worry about. And it's easy to overlook, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so these are the kind of people I could direct to you. And I guess my other thing is we've talked about the legal stuff tonight, but what typically is, what does a customer look like to you? Is this typically you work with startups, the smaller, the medium guy? What is your target market for a typical client?
Well, it runs the gamut. We primarily practice in the areas of business and healthcare. And we've got clients that are single member startups who are just getting their company off the ground. And we've got much larger, more established companies. We don't really litigate. We're mostly a transactional firm. So that means we're going to help you with things like contract drafting and review, your legal structure, minor disputes, arbitration, mediation, things like that. So, we help clients from large to small, but like I said, it runs the gamut. We try to meet clients where they are. And what we've learned is, you take a client and they're small, a year later, they may not be. And so we love helping people get their ideas off the ground and kind of watching their business grow.
Yeah, and I would imagine it takes the stress off of them having to do all this work where they could just call on you and let you kind of handle that side of it so they can start working on the business, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
How many people do you know work in their business and not on it, always worried about this stuff, right?
Yeah, well, and of course, that's a lesson that many of us have learned the hard way.
Yeah, you think? Been there, done that.
Yes,
So,
sir.
gosh, thank you. We're kind of wrapping toward the end. Is there anything we missed? Anything you want to add additionally to this besides the last concert you went to in high school, and who was the last band you listened to? Can you tell us that just to get the Joshua fun out of you? Or what's your favorite music? Let me put it that way. I always have to ask one fun question at the end, if you don't mind.
My favorite musician would have to be Waylon.
There you go.
Waylon Jennings.
There you go. So. Perfect. See, we got that out of Josh tonight, y'all. We got that out of him. Hey, listen, buddy, I appreciate you being on the Austin Biz Buzz.
Man, I appreciate you very much. Thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it.
All right, guys, you've been part of the Austin Biz Buzz. We build the buzz about Austin business with Josh Massingill. He's business attorney in Texas. He lives in Austin, but he can handle anything you've got going on in Texas. So, Joshua, thanks for being a guest on the Austin Biz Buzz, and good night.
Anytime, my friend.
All right. Good night.